What's up, everyone? Welcome back to day 2 of the 2019 Film Room Fantasy Rankings for PPR leagues. Today, we're touching on the wide receivers, and there's just as many names to talk about at receiver today as there were yesterday when we hit running backs, so prepare for this one to be long as well. And of course, also keep in mind that as we go through all these rounds, that these rankings will change substantially throughout the month of August as people get hurt and as depth charts kind of shift around during preseason. So if you want access to all the weekly updates, just head on over to my Patreon page and join up there. It doesn't matter what your pledge is, it can be even as low as $1 a month, and you'll get full access to everything, all the updates for PPR and standard, and the combined rankings, the combined position rankings, as well as Patron-Only Q&A sessions, so check that out if you want to. For now, though, on this channel, for everyone to see, I'm going to be running through each and every round, or I guess some may call them tiers, whatever you want to say, of wide receivers to explain why I have everyone initially ranked where they are heading into the preseason based on all the research and all the film study that I've done over the last 3 months. And you may notice that the depth distribution at receiver looks a hell of a lot different than the running back distribution did yesterday. And that's something to pay attention to before we get started, because the wide receiver position is much deeper at different stages of the draft than running back is. There are only 10 receivers that I would willingly draft in the first 2 rounds, compared to when you look at yesterday, there were 16 running backs that I would draft in the first 2 rounds. So receiver is a lot thinner at the top. However, what that means, at least in my opinion, is that if you are in the middle of the first round, maybe at the 5th or 6th pick, after the big 4 running backs are off the board, and if you're worried about not getting a true wide receiver 1, just go ahead and take Hopkins or Adams and sleep better at night, because there will be a lot of potential RB1 caliber backs to choose from with your next 2 picks all the way into the early and mid-3rd round, like Kerryon Johnson or even potentially Devonta Freeman and Aaron Jones in the early 3rd. I've seen them slip that far in a lot of my mock drafts, but there will not be any true wide receiver 1s left by that point, especially in PPR leagues, or at least not any reliable wide receiver 1s left. You know, you could even take a tight end or a 3rd running back even into round 4 if you're a big fan of David Montgomery or Phillip Lindsay and still be totally fine, because the receiver position, at least again in my opinion, doesn't truly get deep until after that in rounds 5 and 6 and on. So again, you've got to pay attention to where these different positions are deepest in relation to different rounds so that you can kind of avoid panic picks that are a bad value. You know, receiver is deepest in the middle by far, and running back is deepest early and late, so you've got to kind of plan the sequencing of your draft strategy around that. Now, before I get into my actual thoughts on all these names and why I have them slotted where they are, I do want to take a quick second to once again thank our sponsor for this week, Manscaped. They provide anything and everything that a man needs for grooming, whether it's their no-nick ceramic trimmers, to safety razors that can last you forever and have super inexpensive refills, to body washes, to cologne, to anti-chafing deodorants, to boxers. I mean, whatever you need, they've got. And you can either buy all of their products individually. My personal favorite is their body wash. I think it smells amazing. Or you can buy it as part of a complete package that comes out at essentially half the price that you would if you paid for all of them separately. Or if you do have any of those products separately and you love them and you want more, Manscaped also now offers replenish plans that can send you refills at whatever time interval you choose at an even more heavily discounted rate. So if you want to try out Manscaped, or if you've already tried them and love the results and want more, head on over to the link in the description below and enter promo code BRETT20 for both 20% off the order of your choice and free shipping. And with that, let's get back into the nitty-gritty of these receivers and what each round value, in my opinion, should get you in terms of studs versus starters versus matchup-dependent flex players and, of course, late-round sleepers. Now, round 1, obviously, are your slam dunk, no doubt about it studs, DeAndre Hopkins, Davante Adams, and Odell Beckham Jr. Hopkins and Adams in particular are pretty much universally seen as 1A and 1B. Some people prefer Adams, some prefer Hopkins. I personally don't think it makes that big of a difference. I think they're both going to end up with probably the top 4 or 5 like guaranteed touchdowns at the receiver position. Adams, I think, is going to end up with more touchdowns, but Hopkins is a red zone monster himself. So I suppose it kind of depends on their offenses overall in terms of red zone opportunities generated. But I think you can pretty much lock them in both for being in the top 5 at their position in touchdowns, which of course is incredibly valuable. They're both going to catch over 100 balls. They're both probably going to get at least at like absolute minimum 1,400 yards. It would be my guess. I mean, they are both. It's not even a debate to me that both of them are in the top 5 in the NFL at their position right now. You can fill out the rest of it with, Julio or Odell or Michael Thomas or Antonio Brown. Whoever you want to put around them is fine, but I think you can't have a top 5 without Hopkins and Adams right now. They are absolutely killing the league. So I think they are very well deserving of being the number 1 and number 2 receivers. They are matchup proof. Every single week, I think they can get you at least 15 to 20 points, especially in PPR. I have zero reservations about playing them against any defense, any corner, any week, no matter what. And when it comes to Hopkins, with any quarterback throwing to him, but he's kind of proven to almost be quarterback proof, other than when he played with Brock Osweiler. And then just below that obvious top tier of Hopkins and Adams, I have Odell Beckham just slightly below them. I really, really, really love his fit in Cleveland. I think he's going to be a phenomenal pairing with Baker Mayfield, who is an extremely accurate quarterback. They've already shown to have great timing, especially on back shoulder fades. I think he's going to be an incredible red zone weapon for them. Even though he's not the biggest guy, he's got such a tremendous catch radius and such great ball control, on the boundaries and at the pylons, that I think Baker's going to be able to throw him fades every single week and come down with a whole lot of touchdowns. I think as well, he's also going to end up catching probably at least 90 balls. His yards per catch might be a little bit higher than Hopkins and Adams. But in terms of total yardage, I'm not 100% sure what his total yardage is going to be, because there's a lot of mouths to feed in Cleveland. But, he is clearly far and away the best player on that offense, in my opinion. And he's finally got a top 15 type of quarterback throwing to him. He never really had that with Eli. Even, earlier in Odell's career, before Eli kind of totally fell off the wagon, he was never anything close to what Baker is now. So this is the best quarterback that Odell has ever played with by far. He's got the best cast of weapons around him to kind of take some attention away by far, which I know can be a little bit of a double-edged sword, because we know that Baker's going to spread it around because they have so many weapons. But at the same time, when you have so many weapons around you, that means your offense overall is going to be more effective. Your third down percentages are going to be more effective. Your drives are going to last longer, which then gives more touches overall to the offense, which means more passing attempts, which means more targets for Odell. So the better the offense is around him, I don't really subscribe to the notion that he's going to lose a whole lot of targets because of, Landry, Njoku, and all the other weapons there. If anything, I think it's going to help Odell, because that means the offense overall will be more efficient and stay on the field longer, which then gives him more opportunities. So I've got Odell as my third-ranked wide receiver. You could argue for Mike Thomas there. You could argue for Julio Jones, but I just think the offense in Cleveland and the quarterback situation in Cleveland is going to give Odell potentially the best year of his career, and that's saying a lot for Odell's standards. Moving on to round 2, these are another 7 names who, in my opinion, will end up as wide receiver 1s, or at the very least are highly likely to end up as wide receiver 1s. I see them as slightly a tier below the kind of half tier of Odell. You could argue for any one of these guys finishing at top 5 in their position. Michael Thomas is obviously a reception magnet. He's going to be, at minimum, again, 100 balls caught this year. He's probably the best slot receiver in the league, even though we see slot receivers a lot of the time. They're kind of the smaller, quicker, more diminutive guys. But Mike Thomas, he plays that big slot role in New Orleans, and he plays it better than anyone else. I think you could very easily call him the most efficient and the most dangerous slot receiver in the whole NFL, and he's going to get fed like it. They're not paying him to catch 90 balls. They're paying him to catch 115, and I think that's what he's going to hit this year. Same kind of thing with Julio. As long as he's healthy, which is kind of always been the big question with him because he always just kind of seems to be banged up with something, but he'll play through it and still be productive. But if he's healthy and on the field, I think we're going to go back to seeing that kind of old Julio that they're actually going to use in the red zone, in addition to being a heavily targeted X-receiver. Dirk Cutter's back in Atlanta, and I think the only time Julio ever hit double-digit touchdowns was under Cutter back when he was in his second or third year. And in his last year with Cutter, he hit 1,600 yards and 6 touchdowns. So I think we are going to see them use him a little bit more in the red zone than maybe he has been the past few seasons. It kind of seems like the goal line fade wasn't exactly part of the game plan for them, at least as much as it should have been. So hopefully they start integrating that, because I think when you got a 6'3" receiver that jumps 38 inches in the air, you should probably use that inside the 5-yard line. So hopefully they get back to that. I know Dirk Cutter loves Julio. He designed his passing game around Julio when Julio was in his first few years in the league to great effect. Again, as a second-year player, he had 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. So if we can get that again out of Julio, or better, which I think is reasonable as an expectation, if we can get 1,210 out of Julio, that's probably going to be good enough for a top 6 to 7 finish among wide receivers in fantasy. And so I think that's worthy of taking him as one of the first 5 receivers off the board and a very solid second-round pick. Again, health is probably the biggest question with him. It always has been, whether it's lingering, lower body injuries or whatever. But if he plays through it, he's always been productive. So as long as he's on the field, I feel pretty confident in him. Beyond Julio, there's Tyreek Hill, who I've got as wide receiver 6. Hill is a little bit different than maybe some of the other names. Like, he's kind of the anti-Michael Thomas to me. Like, Thomas is going to probably be one of the most consistent fantasy weapons because he's going to get fed so many targets and put up so many receptions from week to week, and then occasionally also have those huge monster games with a couple touchdowns. But, we know he's going to get very consistent targets from week to week. Whereas Hill, depending on how defenses are playing him and how they're kind of structuring their coverages, we've seen Hill have very quiet weeks, and we've seen Hill have absolutely monster weeks. If they're seeing a lot of split safety looks, they're going to run him right down the middle on those dart routes and get him matched up with a safety one-on-one and get those huge touchdowns that we've become accustomed to. If they're playing more kind of single high and more cover 1 and cover 3, that's when we might, if he's matched up with a corner on the outside in cover 3 or cover 1 that has a lot of speed, he might struggle a little bit more against that, maybe not get as many balls thrown his way. Those are going to be the weeks where really I'm looking more at Travis Kelce, because Travis Kelce absolutely annihilates cover 3 and cover 1 teams that, try to match him up with safeties and linebackers man-to-man, or, leave him running free in the seam. Anyway, we'll get to tight ends later in the week, but kind of depending on the defenses that the Chiefs are playing against, it's either going to be a Hill game or a Kelce game or a Damian Williams game. It's a little bit more boom or bust with him. I think his floor isn't as low as it was earlier in his career. I don't think he's ever going to be the kind of guy that dips below, 8 or 9 points in a week, but you're going to have to take the 9 or 10 point weeks with the 35 point weeks and then kind of figure out how you want to build your team around that, because he's not going to pop off every single week. Like, he's not that kind of receiver. I don't want to say he's one-dimensional, but there are clearly defenses that he is a better matchup against than others. So specifically, I'm going to be paying attention to him against Denver, because I'm very intrigued to see how Vic Fangio plays him. Kind of getting more into a daily fantasy discussion here, but if we see him going up against kind of that heavy cover 4 that Vic Fangio used in Chicago, and he's getting one-on-one matchups with safeties in the slot, now you're going to see Tyreek Hill one-on-one with Kareem Jackson, which to me is just bombs away all day. So that's kind of an example of how, against Denver, it's a great matchup, and he could pop off for 30. But if they're playing against, who's a really good cover 3? If they're playing against, let's say, Jacksonville, I don't even know if they're playing the Jags this year, where we're going to sit in cover 3, and then we're going to have Jalen Ramsey, who also runs high 4-3, low 4-4, shadow him even into the slot. That can be a little bit rougher of a matchup for him. So Tyreek he's definitely a top 10 receiver to me. I put him at wide receiver 6 because his potential to win you games all by himself is very valuable, but you kind of have to plan your flex spots accordingly around him because the points just aren't going to be there every single week, like maybe with some of the receivers that are ahead of him on this list. That moves to Juju Smith-Schuster, who, again, is kind of one of those anti-Tyreek Hill, where I think Juju's going to be incredibly consistent. Regardless of the defense that he's facing, he's going to be similar to Michael Thomas, used in the slot a lot as like that big slot. They're going to use his big frame to box out smaller corners on slants. They're going to be running those slot fades with him that they love. Get him on the move with drags and rub concepts to kind of generate yards after the catch. He and Michael Thomas are very, very similar receivers. And of course, Juju also has red zone ability, just like Michael Thomas. So he's probably a more consistent week-to-week option. Antonio Brown no longer being there doesn't really bother me at all because even with Antonio Brown on the outside, that doesn't automatically mean that safeties are just zeroing in on AB. Like, again, if it's single high looks, it's not like they're going to be only putting one safety over the top on AB's side and leaving the rest of the field uncovered. Like, that's not how cover 1 or cover 3 work. So when they're going up against Baltimore that runs mostly single high, when they're going up against Cincinnati that runs mostly single high, Cleveland runs mostly single high, like, he's not just automatically going to be doubled. Like, that's just not how that coverage works. So I'm not really concerned that AB is no longer there. If anything, he's not going to be doubled any more than he already was, because when you're a big slot receiver, most of the time, you are facing multiple defenders in the form of linebackers sitting in zone over the middle while slot corners play outside leverage on you. So I don't really think anything's going to be changing in terms of how defenses play against Juju, and we've already seen him be incredibly productive in that role, even fighting against those constant double teams from linebackers inside. So again, schematically, I'm not worried about him. We know that he's going to be consistent. We know he's going to be productive, and I think he is very easily worth a top 7 or 8 receiver pick solely because of that. Don't worry about AB being gone. It doesn't matter. Just below him, Mike Evans that's also an intriguing one to me because theoretically, like the Bruce Arians offense, it's going to be more of the same of what benefited Evans last season, where he put up monster numbers in a very vertical offense where we're taking shots on 9 routes and deep posts and occasionally getting him on the move with shallow crosses to kind of generate yards after catch, even though he's not a great yards after catch receiver, but when you're running those drive concepts or shallow crosses or getting them on the move with move screens, that kind of stuff, like you can kind of artificially generate some yak here and there. So really, Evans playing that X receiver role in that offense last year gives me a lot of confidence for how Arians is going to use him because it's going to be essentially the same thing. And Jameis, for all his faults, I think he can throw the deep ball a little bit, especially when he's got such a great catch radius with Evans to work with. He doesn't have to be super pinpoint accurate. He just has to kind of throw it up and give him as many opportunities as possible. And we know that Arians is going to give both of them as many opportunities as possible. So I think there's going to be a lot of situations where if we see single high, it's automatic go balls to Mike, which can only be good for us for fantasy because I think he's going to come down with the majority of those. So I'm very high on Evans. Maybe at least in PPR, he won't have the same value as some of the guys ahead of him because I don't think he's going to catch as many balls as Thomas or Odell or Adams or Hopkins, but I could still very easily see him putting up similar yardage totals, the 1,500 yards, potentially double-digit touchdowns, again, because they love to throw to their receivers in the red zone in this Arians offense. So, he could put up a very comparable point total to some of the guys ahead of him just on a much lower reception count, which docks his value a tiny little bit. But overall, should still be a top 10 receiver, at minimum a top 12 receiver to make him a wide receiver 1 in 12-team leagues like I have him ranked here. So I'm pretty confident in him. Equally confident in Keenan Allen. He's been healthy the last 2 years and has absolutely ripped up the league now that he's finally been healthy. I kind of get a lot of like Matt Stafford vibes with Keenan Allen, where early in Stafford's career it was it was just constant injuries, and people were wondering, okay, is he ever going to be healthy? And then he finally got healthy and threw for, what was it, 5,000 yards one year. And Keenan, same kind of thing. He started out his career just constantly injured or banged up in some way, shape, or form the first 3 or 4 years of his career, stayed healthy the last 2 years, and just started obliterating people as one of the best receivers in the league. And I see no reason to doubt that he can do that again. 2 straight years of being healthy and 2 straight years of being ultra productive. I'm very, very high on Keenan. You could argue him as being at least more valuable in PPR ahead of some of the guys that I have ranked above him, but I also have to factor in Mike Williams here, who I think is going to vulture a lot of red zone opportunities that Keenan maybe would have gotten earlier in his career before Williams showed up. I think once you get inside the 10-yard line, it's going to be the Mike Williams show, whereas everything before that to get them into the red zone is going to be the Keenan Allen show. So again, it's PPR value versus touchdown value. I think both of them are very, very rosterable, even on the same team. Like, if you're doing like a daily stack with Rivers, Williams, and Keenan, depending on the defense you're going up against, I'm totally for that, because I think there's a conceivable scenario where Keenan gets 10 receptions and 100 yards, and Williams gets 4 catches and 2 touchdowns, and Rivers throws 4 touchdowns, and all of them absolutely feast. So, overall, I'm very, very high on this offense. I think both receivers in LA are startable every single week, pretty much no matter what, with Keenan obviously being the more valuable one in PPR leagues because he's going to be a reception monster. So, if you want to bump him up a little bit, maybe ahead of Evans or arguably ahead of Juju and Tyreek, I would totally understand. I think Tyreek, Juju, and Evans all have a slightly higher ceiling, but Keenan is just pure steady Eddie. You know what his floor is. Every single week he's going to be a monster, and I think that's a second-round pick very well spent to me. And then at the end of the second round, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but I've got Antonio Brown ranked as my wide receiver 10 this year. Out of, 74 guys I think I've got total in these rankings, and I've got Antonio Brown 10th. And any other year, the last 5 years, that would have seemed crazy. But to me, the change in teams and environment and system is going to impact him more than maybe people thought. I've broken down Antonio and Roethlisberger's connection before on this channel and how important they were to each other. In the sense that a lot of Antonio's receptions, like individually, when you're looking at his route running ability, his ball skills, his speed, like he's a phenomenal receiver. This is not an indictment on his talent. He is, pound for pound, one of the greatest wide receivers to ever play this game. I completely agree. But a huge percentage of his catches and overall production was because of the connection that he had with Roethlisberger. And I'm not saying that Big Ben was the reason that Antonio was good or that Ben made AB. I'm not saying that at all. But the fact that they could read each other's mind on the field in terms of how to bend routes certain way, where Ben was going to throw the ball against certain leverages and certain coverages. And, they had an absolutely supernatural connection, which, again, you want to go back and look at that episode I did on them. Like, it was one of the rare connections that it's hard to replicate that. And I don't think that Derek Carr and AB are immediately going to have that same kind of connection and communication that he had with Ben in the first year out the gate. Like, Antonio runs his routes a very specific way, and Derek is going to have to know that against every single coverage for every single play in this playbook. And, he had that connection with Ben. He doesn't have it with Derek yet. And so considering the large percentage of AB's production that was, in my opinion, solely made possible because of his and Ben's improvisational ability after the snap, like that production's not just going to suddenly come back. like that's going to take a little time for them to get on that same level. If they ever even do, I don't know if they will. So I'm a little bit, I don't want to say skeptical, but I'm a little bit maybe down on Brown compared to some other people because I know how important Ben was to him in terms of Ben knowing Antonio inside and out. So I'm a little bit worried about Brown's potential dip in production in Oakland. Individually, still a phenomenal receiver, still one of probably the 5 best in the league. Again, pound for pound in terms of route running and ball skills and speed and all that kind of stuff. But, changing offenses can sometimes really, really impact production, especially for receivers. And I'm not super confident that he's going to pick up right where he left off. Moving on to round 3, and here's where we see, along with some of the guys in round 4, who we'll get to in just a second, but with round 3, here's where you start seeing those really, really solid wide receiver 2s, the high-end wide receiver 2s that could push for kind of low-end wide receiver 1 status, but most of them will end up as wide receiver 2s. Hilton, Thielen, Cooks, and Cooper. I don't want to say they're matchup proof, but it's hard for me to imagine a scenario other than health where I'm not playing them every single week. Maybe if Luck's calf injury turns into something more serious and he misses a lot of time, Hilton would probably get moved down a little bit because I think his connection with Andrew is similar to AB and Ben. His connection with Andrew is a big part of the reason why he's so damn productive. Thielen, I think, is almost matchup proof. Maybe doesn't have the same ceiling as the Hopkins and the Adams and the Julios of the world, but there was a long stretch of time last year where you could pretty much pencil him in for 100 yards no matter what. And sometimes he would throw in some touchdowns and really pop off for you. But, his floor is just stratospherically high. So he's worth a high-end wide receiver 2 pick just for that, because you know what you're going to get with him every single week. Brandon Cooks, just below him, he's kind of a similar story to T.Y. Hilton, to be honest, in that there's going to be some weeks where he completely and utterly dominates and kind of wins you the matchup all by himself, putting up 30-plus points, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns, 8 catches, just goes off like any true wide receiver 1 can. And then there's going to be a lot of weeks where he's a lot quieter. And I think that kind of, in terms of predicting Cooks's week in and week out stat line, a lot of it comes down to matchup because he's maybe a little bit more of a deep threat than a possession receiver. Not that he's not a good route runner, but I've always seen him have more success as a true deep threat on the outside than as a chain mover like maybe Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are. And speaking of Kupp, there is a very interesting statistical correlation between Cooper Kupp being on the field and Brandon Cooks being productive. Robert Woods was kind of productive no matter what, but Cooper Kupp being kind of the main chain mover in LA for the Rams, almost kind of going back to what I was talking about with Odell before, it's a very highly efficient offense when all of their weapons are on the field. But when their main chain mover got injured and was no longer there to move the chains on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, which is what his main role was, all of a sudden drives were not being sustained at the same rate. They weren't getting as many, 1st and 10 or 2nd and 3 kind of easy shot play opportunities, which is where Cooks excels. And so when Cooper Kupp wasn't on the field to kind of keep the offense moving and keep the offense on schedule, you're not going to be taking a whole lot of deep shots when your offense isn't maintaining balance and it isn't on schedule. So Kupp being back and healthy, presumably for the Rams, is going to help Cooks a lot because now he can pretty much just excel in his one role, which is getting deep balls and scoring long touchdowns and kind of being that explosive option in their passing game, while Kupp and Woods kind of handle everything else. And that is his best role. So I think conceivably, if the Rams stay healthy, which is a big if, but if they stay healthy, I could conceivably see a scenario where Cooks catches, 70 balls, nothing too awesome, but 70 balls and then like 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns. So maybe a much lower reception count than some of the other guys on this list, maybe 40 less receptions than some of the true wide receiver ones at the top, but still a shit ton of yards and a lot of touchdowns, which again is still valuable as a very high end or solid wide receiver too. Maybe won't crack the top 12, but I think we'll certainly crack the top 20, again, as long as the situation with Cooper Kupp, stays healthy for the year. Kind of interesting that a number 1 wide receiver would be so dependent on his slot receiver, but both statistically and on film, that's just kind of what I noticed. Amari Cooper right after him is the last of the 3rd round graded wide receivers. And I think it's very interesting how Dak Prescott, I don't want to say he became a good quarterback, but he became a much better quarterback with Amari Cooper on the field than when he didn't have Amari. Giving him a true number one option in that offense did wonders for his efficiency and his production, and obviously the Cowboys' win total as a whole. I still don't think that Amari's quarterback situation is great. You could argue that there's at least 11 quarterbacks in the NFC that are better than Dak, and maybe 18 to 20 quarterbacks in the NFL as a whole that are better than Dak. But when I factor in just how damn good Amari is as a receiver, he's a top-tier route runner. He's got excellent deep speed. His hands can be hit or miss. Obviously he had a lot of drop problems earlier in his career in Oakland. He actually had a lot of drop problems at Alabama too. He's never had awesome hands. He's just kind of had okay hands. But, he's got everything else that you want in a true number one wide receiver. So there's going to be games where, he drops an easy touchdown or, he's wide open on a dig on 3rd and 10 and drops it. And then he comes back the next drive and catches a 40-yard touchdown on a post. Like, he's going to be inconsistent. That's just kind of what he is. But he was heavily productive despite his inconsistencies and despite, in my opinion, his issues at quarterback, because Dak is highly inconsistent himself. What that translates to, I've got 13 receivers ahead of him. What that translates to is him still being a very productive wide receiver too. I don't think he'll hit wide receiver 1 like maybe some of the other guys in this round could hit. I mean, it's conceivable that Cooks is a wide receiver 1, a low-end wide receiver 1. It's conceivable that Thielen and Hilton are low-end wide receiver 1s. I don't think that Cooper can hit that, but his floor as a wide receiver 2 is incredibly high, even despite his inconsistency, because he is so damn talented. It'll be interesting to see if this Zeke holdout bleeds into the regular season, if that kind of cripples the Cowboys offense. I don't know that it will, because I do like Alfred Morris and I like Mike Weber, so I don't think that it's going to cripple the Cowboys offense, but without Zeke on the field and being kind of the heart and soul of their whole system, I am intrigued to see how that affects Dak and how it affects Cooper, but I'm not really in a position at the moment to kind of make any predictions about how it's going to affect them. I think as long as their offensive line is healthy, and as long as Alfred Morris doesn't completely shit the bed, which I don't think he will, I think their run game will be fine, at least fine enough for the passing game to still be okay. Cooper is probably going to catch the large majority of targets in this offense because I don't think they have a whole lot of other real viable pass catchers there anymore. But, I'm not going to complain about him getting a huge volume, at least in fantasy football, because volume usually translates to points. So overall with Cooper, he's highly inconsistent. His quarterback is inconsistent. The running game has a question mark, but the flashes of brilliance are so damn good that he's still going to end up with wide receiver 2 numbers, which to me makes it worthy of a 3rd round pick. Round 4, again, similar kind of thing. A lot of wide receiver 2s, kind of high to mid-tier wide receiver 2s. But these guys are all a lot more consistent than I would say a lot of the round 3 guys were, where it's Hilton and Cooks and Cooper. Pretty much the only high floor guy in that round 3 tier was Thielen. Whereas in round 4, I think Robert Woods is a high floor guy. Tyler Boyd's a high floor guy, especially now that AJ Green's hurt. Tyler Boyd's going to get most of the volume in that passing game. I think Kenny Golladay is a high floor guy. He's probably going to be the wide receiver 1 in Detroit. And I think he's a very underrated talent at wide receiver as well. Just a huge, big body that can dominate you on jump balls. Very good on in-breaking routes where you can kind of use his size and leverage to his advantage. He's another pretty high floor option to me. Will he be maybe as high ceiling as some of the other guys ahead of him, like a Julio or a Keenan Allen or Odell? Obviously not. That's why he's a round 4 pick. But you could do a hell of a lot worse for a high floor wide receiver too than Kenny Golladay. Same thing with Woods. He's going to pop off every now and then, but I don't necessarily think his ceiling is as high as Hilton or Cooks or Cooper. So in a PPR league, especially when you're taking Woods, you're taking him as more of like a stabilizing player to kind of counteract maybe some of the boom or bust picks that you took earlier or that you plan to take later. Will he get you 25 points? Probably not, but he'll at least get you 12, which is pretty valuable in a PPR. Stefon Diggs, I think, is maybe a little bit more of a boomer bust guy. Thielen was a lot more stable than Diggs, I feel like. Diggs was much more up and down, much lower floor, much higher ceiling. It seemed like towards the end of the year, he was on track to hit 11 or 1,200 yards, and he only needed, I think, less than 100 yards to hit 1,000 in the final 3 weeks of the year, if I recall correctly, and he barely got it by week 17. There's potential for him to have so much more production, but it comes in bunches. There's weeks he explodes, and there's weeks that he does absolutely nothing compared to Thielen, where he's pretty much steady Eddie throughout the whole season. So Diggs, he's more of a boomer bust round 4 pick that can give you a little bit more dynamism to your roster if maybe you kind of play it straight down the fairway in the first 3 rounds. If you go Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins in the first round, and then you kind of go some easy, safe running back picks in round 2 and round 3, and then you want somebody who can really pop off as a wide receiver 2 or a borderline flex pick in round 4. Diggs, I think, is a pretty solid pick to fill that. And then you kind of just play around matchups and see when you want to put him in the lineup and when you want to maybe look at some of your other receiver options to plug into wide receiver 2. I'm getting more into philosophy here, but there's a fundamental difference in how you approach playing Diggs versus how you approach playing Woods and Golladay and Boyd, because I think they're, even if they end up averaging the same amount of points throughout the season, the consistency in which they put up those points is very, very different. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're building your team, high floor guys versus high ceiling guys, and how you kind of work them in together on a week-to-week basis. Round 5, here is where really the meat of this receiver crop this year is. Like I said earlier, you're thinner at the top than running back is, and it still kind of stays a little bit thin into round 3 and round 4. And then once you get into the middle rounds, round 5, 6, and a little bit even into round 8, but certainly round 5 the most, that's where you get the true values. That's where this class is deepest, and that's where I think you can win your league, is in this round 5 group of receivers, because there's a lot of just truly excellent values in these 9 names right here. Cristian Kirk, I've got Cristian Kirk rated higher than almost everybody else that I've seen around. I've got him rated as a 5th round, a 5th round pick. I think he's got like a 7th or 8th round ADP right now, but I am all in on Cristian Kirk this year. I think he's going to be the de facto number 1 in that Cardinals offense. He and Kyler Murray have a phenomenal connection already because they've known each other for years, really. They both know the offense very well. Kyler basically ran this offense even since high school, so he knows it in and out. He's already got full control at the line of scrimmage. Cristian Kirk already knows all of the tags and route adjustments and all the terminology. Like, they hit the ground running in OTAs. They really didn't have to take time to build chemistry because they already had it. I mean, for God's sake, they were roommates in college, even though Kyler transferred. I mean, these guys have known each other for a long time. They've thrown together. They know each other's timing. They know the offense. And Kirk is a really, really talented receiver in his own right. Great route runner, great hands, sneaky deep speed. I think when they split out and they go 4 wide, or if they go 3-by-1 and you've got both Larry and Kirk in the slot, I think he's going to do special things and put up a 100-catch season. Maybe won't get the same kind of total yardage as some of the other, big slots that I had earlier in this draft, like Thomas and Juju. But I think, penciling him in for like 100 catches and 1,100 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns is not out of the realm of possibility. And especially in a PPR, I mean, that's extremely valuable. That's every week wide receiver 2, or very minimum every week automatic flex play numbers right there. So I'm very, very high on Kirk. I think he's going to be one of the surprises of this entire NFL season. I think he's going to be a Pro Bowler, and I think he's going to join that 100 reception club and kind of take over the mantle as the Cardinals' number 1 receiver as Larry Fitzgerald kind of winds his career down. So very, very excited to see what he and Kyler do this year. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. And just kind of overall note on the Cardinals, that offense overall is going to be better than people think it is. People are they're not giving enough credit to the air raid, in my opinion. They're going to take some people by surprise. Right after Kirk, we have almost the opposite kind of receiver, Tyler Lockett. He's going to have a hell of a lot fewer receptions than Kirk, but probably more yardage and more touchdowns. One of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous, deep threat in the NFL last year. He and Russell have a supernatural connection. I actually did an episode on that last year, kind of explaining how the Seahawks deep ball functions and how it's very, I guess, improvisational is the best word for it. I mean, there's a lot of times where Russell's running around and preserving as much time as humanly possible because he doesn't know what route Tyler is running yet. And he has to wait for Tyler to make that second or third stem in the route before he can finally unleash it downfield and get an easy touchdown. So it's a very, very unique situation in Seattle in terms of how their deep ball works because they have a quarterback like Russell Wilson who can buy an almost infinite amount of time back there. And Tyler is a very creative route runner in his own right. So I don't really expect that to change this year. I think they're going to be doing essentially the exact same thing they did last year, where it's pound the ball with Carson, pound the ball with Penny, throw it deep to Tyler, throw it to DK every now and then. Who DK also is a really, really damn good deep threat in his own right. So I kind of expect more of the same. And to me, that's worth a 5th-round pick. I think, getting 9 or 10 touchdowns, even on only 50 or 60 catches, is what I probably expect him to get. Like, that's perfectly acceptable to me. That's every week wide receiver 2 or flex numbers to me, easily. I'll take that any day of the week. And, I think all of you guys would too, because that's very reliable production for an offense that doesn't throw the ball a whole lot. So I'm all about Tyler Lockett in round 5. I think you could do a hell of a lot worse for a wide receiver 2 or a flex play. So sign me up for that. Jarvis Landry just below him, maybe won't have the same volume that he's had earlier in his career, when he was setting records for like most receptions in the first 3-4 seasons of a player's career. I don't think he's going to get that same kind of volume, but he is still going to get plenty of volume. Like I still imagine a scenario where he's catching at least 80 balls, probably putting up 900 to 1,000 yards, maybe somewhere around 6 or 7 touchdowns. That's pretty damn good for a low-end wide receiver 2 or a flex option, especially in a PPR, because we've seen what his ceiling in a PPR is before as a 100-plus ball a year kind of guy. So I'm very high on Jarvis Landry solely for his consistency. Maybe the ceiling isn't there like it is with Odell in the same offense, but the floor is certainly just as high. So I think you could do a hell of a lot worse than him as a 5th-round pick. Dante Pettis just below Landry, I think, has a much higher ceiling than maybe even any of the other guys that are above him in this round. I think he's got a higher ceiling than Kirk, Lockett, and Landry, because I think he's going to end up as the number 1 wide receiver in that Niners offense, whether he's more of a big slot or if he plays kind of that traditional Shanahan X receiver role. I think he can do both. He's taken a lot of snaps both outside and inside in camp. But I think he's going to be their de facto number 1 no matter where he lines up. And usually the number 1 receiver in a Shanahan-style West Coast offense gets fed a lot of balls. A lot of them. He's a really good route runner. Deceptive deep speed, not the fastest guy, but he's got a lot of build-up speed. And I think if you don't disrupt him early in the route and you let him just kind of get running free, like he can eventually run past you. Maybe he doesn't have the acceleration of some of the other better deep threats in the league, but if you let him get going, he can toast you. Great hands, excellent toughness over the middle, just super smart as a receiver. Like I'm very, very high on Dante Pettis. I think he's going to end up being their number 1 this year. And I don't want to say that he's guaranteed to have the same kind of production that former Shanahan number 1s have had, like Julio and Andre Johnson and Pierre Garçon, where it's like automatically 100+ catches and automatically 1,400 yards and all that kind of stuff. But traditionally, the number 1 in this system has been heavily productive, and I think he's going to be the number 1. So I'm very, very high on Pettis. I've got him ranked higher than most other people do, but that's just because I'm very familiar with this system, and I'm familiar with how Kyle likes to feed his X receivers in this system. So Dante, to me, is worth a 5th-round pick. It's a lot higher than other people got him, but I know what this offense can do for their number one, and I think that it's going to do phenomenal things for him. Moving on to DJ Moore, who is very intriguing because as a receiver, I love DJ. A little bit of a fumbleitis problem as a rookie, but in terms of pure receiver skills, route running ability, hands, deep speed, quickness in and out of breaks, toughness over the middle, like he's got everything you want. He's a great young receiving talent. But I do think that Curtis Samuel is going to eat into his target share a little bit, or at least a little bit more than maybe we thought he was going into the training camp. I think we were looking at maybe earlier in the summer as more kind of a lock to be the overwhelming majority target share among this Panthers receiving core. But I think maybe it might be a little bit closer to 50-50 than we think, because Curtis Samuel's shown up and just dominated training camp in every single facet. Some have even said that he's been the most impressive Panthers receiver out of anyone, Moore included. They're both incredibly athletic. Samuel, legit 4.3 kind of guy, ultra quick, ultra explosive. But now we're starting to see him develop as a true top tier route runner. I mean, some of the routes that I've seen him run in training camp videos, I've never seen him run routes like this before. I've never seen him manipulate leverages like this and, loosen up his hips in and out of breaks. I mean, his angles are better. His footwork is better. His leverages are better. His timing is better. I mean, all these subtleties that he's lacked for as long as I can remember watching him, even going back to Ohio State, like he's finally got them. And I don't know what he did this summer, but it clearly worked. And so I think more, if Samuel wasn't breaking out this summer, I would probably put him up into a 4th-round pick, because I think he would have been the overwhelming target monster in this offense. But I think Samuel is going to maybe vulture a few more of those than maybe we previously expected. Overall, it's going to help this offense. It's going to lead to more drives sustained and more overall touches and more overall pass attempts. So overall, it's a rising tide lifts all boats. But in terms of just pure target share, which does matter in fantasy, that might hurt more a little bit. So I have him as a 5th-round pick because I think he still will sort of be the number one, but I think it's going to be more of a Cooks and Woods situation than like a Hopkins and Fuller situation where like there's a clear number one and still a really good number two, where with the Rams, it's kind of like co-number ones, in my opinion. They just serve different roles. So again, Moore, great receiver. I have nothing bad to say about him at all, but the fact that Curtis Samuel's just kicking ass and taking names right now maybe limits what his ceiling would have been if Curtis wasn't breaking out, if that makes sense. After DJ, I've got Julian Edelman here, who it's still Julian, so he's still going to catch a lot of balls. But at some point, 33-year-old receivers do slow down. They do get banged up a little bit more here and there. It's not like Julian's been a picture of health throughout his entire career. He's still going to be a safety valve and a chain mover and all that kind of stuff. I don't necessarily expect him to be another, 100 catch, 1,100 yard kind of receiver like you could almost pencil him in for in years past. I think now we're going to start to see him be more like an 80 to 90 catch, 850 to 900 yard kind of guy. And I think we're going to see James White catch even more balls than he did last year. I think we're going to see James White go over 90 catches and take some of the work that Julian would have had. I think we're going to see a little bit of N'Keal Harry. I think we're going to see, who's that undrafted kid who's been killing it in camp? Jacoby Myers. I'm actually going to talk about him later when we get into the round 11 plus guys, but Myers has apparently been very, very good in camp. So I don't think that this argument of, they have no receivers, they have to throw it to Julian holds water, because I think they do have some weapons to use. They're still going to throw it a lot to Edelman, but I don't necessarily think that he's the only guy that they've got, which, some people have been drafting him as a late 4, early 5 because they think that he's going to get every single target. He's not. They have other guys to throw to. And we still have to consider Julian's durability as a potential issue. I mean, he's coming back from an injury already, broke his thumb playing catch. He's got a whole bunch of lower body injuries in the last, racked up over the last few years. he's had his fair share of injuries, which older receivers do tend to get. And slot receiver or not, it's hard to be productive in your mid-30s. I think he's turning 34 late in the season this year. So he's old by football standards. He's old. So I'm okay with him as like a late 5th round pick. I don't think he should be a late 4, early 5 like some people are taking him. That is just a little bit too rich to my blood. I think his floor is good. The 90 catch, 900 to maybe 1,000 yard kind of floor, which is fine. But I don't think you can really pencil him in for the 100 plus, 1,100, 1,200 yard season like some people are predicting for him. The cupboard is not that bare in New England. They're going to be fine. Cooper Kupp, I talked about him a little bit earlier. He clearly has a role in this Rams offense, as if it's 3rd and 5 or longer, we're throwing it to Kupp. They're not going to be throwing it to Brandon Cooks on 3rd and medium. They might throw it a little bit to Robert. They might throw it a little bit to the running backs or the tight ends, but most of those targets are going to go to Cooper Kupp. He is their primary chain mover. And we've seen, at least in this offense before, if you're a primary chain mover, you're going to get work every single week. Doesn't matter what kind of defense you're playing against, what kind of coverages they run. Doesn't matter if they're running 2-man all day, cover 1 all day, cover 4 all day. It doesn't matter. They're going to throw it to him on 3rd down. They're going to find ways to throw it to him on 3rd down. And so you can pretty much lock him in for at least 5 catches every single week, which in a PPR, that means you're probably getting at least 10 to 12 points every single week. In a 5th round pick for a low end wide receiver 2 or a flex option, or depending on your format, maybe it's a wide receiver 3, whatever your format is, if you can pretty much put somebody in the lineup and say, this guy's going to get me double digit points, that is worth a 5th round pick. There's something to be said about managing floors versus ceilings and balancing out steady players with more boom or bust dynamic players. And Kupp is one of the best examples in all of fantasy football of putting in a high floor player to balance out your boom or bust players. And he's very much worth a 5th round pick because of that. Calvin Ridley, I think, is one of the most talented number 2 receivers in the league. Right up there with the Will Fullers of the world, where on any given week, he can go off for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think he is clearly the number 2 option in that passing game. You can line him up outside. You can put him in the slot. Doesn't matter where they put him. He is the kind of versatile receiver where you can either have him as a Robin or a Batman on any given passing concept, and you're going to be fine. Julio doesn't have to do everything by himself because they have Calvin Ridley. And as I've said it before, when you have 2 great receivers, that means you're going to be sustaining more drives, and a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm going to say that over and over and over again in this breakdown. Receivers are more effective when they have more weapons around them to help them be effective. And Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones will feed off of each other for that reason. Ridley in particular as a receiver, I think you can probably be fairly confident in him catching 80 balls this year. Similar to Cooper Kupp, but I think he's going to be an even better red zone threat than Kupp. I think they are really going to make an effort to get him the ball inside the 10 to 15 yard line, because they did that last year to great effect. He has a nose for the end zone, whether it's throwing him fades to the pylon or giving him bubble screens and letting him kind of do it all himself. This dude can score and score a lot. He may not be the biggest guy, but as a red zone receiver, he's very effective. So I think with Dirk Cutter coming in, if they're not throwing fades to Julio inside the 5, I think they're going to be throwing bubble screens and telling Calvin to go get the whole damn thing himself, and he's going to be able to do that. So I'm very excited to see this Falcons wide receiver duo. I think they're both going to be highly productive. I think they're both going to be every week fantasy starts. And, there's a decent chance that Calvin is going to slip out of the 5th and into the 6th round with the next group of guys that I got going. And that's a hell of a value to me. So, again, fear not about trying to get your wide receiver 2 in the middle rounds. There's a shitload of them. And if you can get a guy like Calvin Ridley in the middle rounds who's going to catch 80 balls and put up 1,000 yards and probably 7 or 8 touchdowns, yeah, sign me up for that. That's a great, great value. Chris Godwin, I kind of talked about him a little bit earlier when I was talking about Mike Evans. This is a vertical offense, and Chris Godwin is a great vertical receiver. Fantastic route runner, really adept at using stems to influence corners, even if they're in zone and they're watching the quarterback and they're watching the ball. He's really good at using stems in his release to kind of manipulate corners away from where that ball is going to be thrown so that he can then leverage himself in the back half of the route to be in a better position to catch it. Great down the field speed, great ball skills, tough as nails over the middle. I don't think this offense is going to be lacking for deep ball ability at all. Like, not just because of Mike Evans, but because of Chris Godwin too. I don't necessarily know what his ceiling is going to be, but I think in terms of a flex play that you're kind of weighing against other options, like, if you're really in need of a shit ton of points and you're not necessarily concerned about floor and you're just desperate for ceiling, Chris Godwin is a very high ceiling receiver from week to week, because he's the kind of guy where he can go nothing for 2.5 quarters and then catch a 75-yard bomb for a touchdown. Like, he's like not saying that he's only going to be a 2 or 3 catch a game kind of receiver and get all of his yardage in 2 or 3 catches like maybe Will Fuller, but he does have that ability. I think it's realistic to expect him to catch somewhere probably around 50, actually not, maybe a little bit higher than that, probably about 60 to 70 balls, and I think he'll get about 8 touchdowns. So again, his overall points per week is going to be the same as everyone else in this round. All of them are going to end up in between 13, 15, maybe 16 points a week on average. But like with some of the other deep threats I've talked about before, Godwin might get his points more in bunches, whereas guys like Cooper Kupp or Dante Pettis or Robert Woods might get them a little bit more consistently and less, boom or bust-ish. So Godwin, again, it's all about how you're building your team. If you're taking a whole bunch of high floor guys as your running backs and you took a high floor guy as your wide receiver 1, it's certainly worth taking him as a potential boom or bust flex option every single week that you can weigh against some other flex options that you're taking in rounds 6, 7, and 8. I think he's worth it to have on your team solely for those really juicy matchups where that they're going to be airing the ball out and throwing it deep down the field, 7 or 8 times in that game, and that he's going to get 4 deep targets and probably catch 2 of them for a shitload of yardage. Like, he's worth it in the 5th round just for those games. Absolutely worth it. So I've got him as a late 5th round, early 6th round kind of pick. And then moving into the 6th round itself, we're going to start off with Allen Robinson. And you could argue that Robinson should be higher than this. The trends in terms of his connection with Mitch Trubisky towards the end of the year, the trends say that he could very easily go back to being that high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 type of player. That 90-plus catch, 1,400-yard, double-digit touchdown kind of guy. Like, he has that talent to be that kind of receiver. That being said, he's had some durability issues in the past. Mitch Trubisky is a highly inconsistent quarterback who, even though I think Mitch is going to improve, we don't know how much he's going to improve. Anthony Miller and Trey Burton and Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery will all obviously be getting a higher percentage of the target share than maybe, at least taking more of the target share than other true number 1 wide receivers would have taken from them. Yes, the rising tide theory is there for Chicago, but if they had their way, this would probably be a run-first team anyway, so maybe the target share would be less no matter what. So I feel comfortable with him, taking all those factors into consideration as an early 6th round pick. The talent is there. The durability has not always been there. The quarterback has not always been there. And the offensive philosophy has not always been there. So round 6 is probably the earliest I'm willing to go with him as of now, recognizing that the ceiling is a lot higher than that, but just kind of trying to be conservative and not get too overzealous with Allen. I'm going to leave him there for now. AJ Green on most years would never be caught in the 6th round of a fantasy draft, but durability has been a major question with him. He's already hurt. He's already going to miss time. We don't know exactly how much, but we know it's going to be at least the first few games. And, there's kind of an old philosophy in fantasy of don't go chasing injuries. If a guy's already had a significant injury, like it's one thing, it's okay, they're resting a hamstring throughout August, but if you tore ligaments in your ankle and foot, like in the first practice, like I don't necessarily think that's an injury we should go chasing earlier than the 6th round. Obviously, if he's on the field and he's healthy, he's one of the best receivers in the game and a true wide receiver 1, but he's not healthy and he's not on the field. So, if you're taking AJ in the 6th round, you're really doing it expecting him to probably not play for the first couple months, or at least not play up to his standards in the first couple months, and you're essentially just stashing him for the playoffs. You're hoping and praying that he's going to be healthy enough to play into December when the fantasy playoffs take place, and you're hoping and praying that he's going to be the old AJ in those games. So it's highly risky. I understand the risk, but I'm not willing to take him higher than round 6, which is lower than most other people are willing to take him. I've seen him go in round 4 and round 5 because people are saying, oh, he's going to be back in 6 to 8 weeks, but that's a significant amount of the fantasy season that you're missing, and that's just to start. Like, we don't know that he's coming back then. So I wouldn't be surprised if his ADP gets even lower than this as we get throughout the month of August. But for now, I'm just kind of leaving it in the middle at round 6, and we'll go from here both directions. After AJ, I've got Mike Williams. You could argue taking any of these guys after AJ, before AJ, if you're more risk averse to injuries like I am. But just in terms of pure ranking, I've got Mike Williams here after AJ in round 6. He's going to be, like I mentioned earlier with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams is going to be the red zone monster. Keenan Allen is going to get them into the red zone. So, his total catches will be nowhere near Keenan. I would be shocked if they were, but he'll probably end up with more touchdowns. So he's going to be a standard league winner, a non-PPR league winner, because he's going to be all touchdowns, all yardage, and no catches. But, that's very valuable to the Chargers offense as a whole, and I think it's going to be very valuable as a flex player in fantasy too. This is the same argument I made with Williams last year, where I had him as, I think, a 9th round value, maybe a 10th round value. Actually, no, I think it was somewhere between 8 and 10. I can't remember. It was last year. But, I said the same thing last year, that he was going to get double-digit touchdowns, but not a whole lot of catches. And he got double-digit touchdowns and not a whole lot of catches. And he was a valuable flex player for a lot of teams, including my team that went to the championship. I put him in the flex every single week, and I really didn't regret it that often. So I think he's going to be the same kind of guy this year. Pencil him in for 10 to 12 touchdowns, maybe more. Depending on if Gordon is there or not, because if Gordon's not there, they're going to have to rely on Williams even more in the red zone. So, his floor for touchdowns, I think, is 10 to 12, and it can only go up from there. And his total catches and total yardage probably be significantly lower than a lot of other guys in this tier. But if you can score, you can score, and that can win you a fantasy matchup one week. If he pops off for 4 catches and 50 yards, but 2 of them are touchdowns, guess what? That's 22 points, which is that's a hell of a day for fantasy. So, I'm all about Mike Williams as a flex option in round 6. Alshon Jeffrey is virtually the same thing. I think he's going to be a big weapon in the red zone for the Eagles this year. You could say Miles Sanders and Zach Ertz could take a lot of goal line work away from Alshon, but if you're packing the box, or if you're double teaming Ertz off the snap and they're giving you a one-on-one outside with Alshon Jeffrey, yeah, they're probably going to take that 8 times out of 10 for a fade and just let Carson throw it up and let Alshon do the rest. Like, he's going to score this year. I can almost guarantee that. He's going to score a lot. The yardage will not be there. The catches will not be there, just like Mike Williams. But for a flex option where you have a potential to get at least 1 touchdown every single week and a couple catches and probably get double-digit points out of that just from that touchdown alone, yeah, that's worth it to me in the 6th round. Sign me up for that. In dynasty leagues, I'm staying away from Alshon because I think J.J. Arcega-Whiteside's going to take his job next year and fulfill that same role. But for now, at least in redraft leagues, yeah, Alshon Jeffrey's going to be my guy. And then Robbie Anderson rounds out my round 6 receivers. I think he's going to end up being the de facto number 1 with the Jets. I think he's probably their most talented receiver. He's going to be their most targeted receiver. Wouldn't be shocked if he ends up catching 80 to 90 balls. His yards per catch probably won't be great, but he's going to be their main chain mover. Not that I don't like Quincy Enunwa, but I just think Robbie Anderson's better. I think he has more versatility as both an outside receiver and an inside receiver that Enunwa doesn't have. He's a better route runner. I think he's got a little bit sneakier deep speed. Not overly fast, but he can kind of crawl up on you a little bit, similar to Dante Pettis that I talked about earlier. So, overall, I'm very high on Robbie Anderson as an individual. Maybe not as high on the Jets offense overall, but I think Robbie's going to get such a huge target share among their wide receivers, maybe along with Lev Bell and Chris Herndon when he gets back. Those are probably going to be their top 3 passing options. So Robbie, I think just from a volume perspective alone, is going to be a pretty comfortable flex play from week to week. Again, maybe not as high of a ceiling as like an Allen Robinson or a healthy AJ Green or, a Calvin Ridley from week to week. But if you just need a high floor player who can come in and catch 5 balls and get 60 yards and, get a touchdown every other week, like he can give you that. Just on volume alone, he can give you that. So I'm pretty satisfied with Robbie Anderson as an every week flex starter in round 6. And that brings us to round 7, and upside is the name of the game in round 7. I talked about Curtis Samuel before. I'm going to talk about him again. This dude is roasting people. He is roasting people so often and so much that he is legitimately making me wonder if DJ Moore will be a clear-cut number 1 receiver in Carolina. Not that DJ Moore is doing anything wrong. He's a great receiver in his own right, but Curtis is, according to all reports, been that good in camp that he might significantly alter the expected target share that we had for DJ Moore. I think, if anything, this is great news for Cam Newton owners because I think he's got a legitimately deadly 1-2 punch at receiver for the first time, only time I can remember, really. Even when Steve Smith was still in Carolina, I can't remember them ever having a truly top-tier wide receiver too. I guess unless you count Greg Olsen. But, when you look at overall weapons on this team, McCaffrey, Samuel, Greg, Moore, like this is the most viable passing targets that Cam has ever had. So just as a quick aside for Newton owners, buy big on him this year because as long as he stays healthy, this is the most explosive offense, at least the most explosive set of skill position players that he's ever had by a pretty significant margin. But back to Samuel, he's been so damn good in camp that I've got him valued like 2 rounds higher than any other ADP list that I can find. I think he's going to get a much bigger target share than people are thinking. I think his development as a route runner and him finally being healthy is going to unlock a whole new level of potential that we didn't even know was possible with him. So, Moore and Curtis, I think, are going to be one of the more underrated receiver duos in the league this year, or potentially by the end of the year, if they're both hitting 1,000 yards, which is very possible in my eye. If they're both hitting 1,000 yards, we could be looking at them as one of the 3 or 4 best duos in the league. So I'm totally fine with Moore at round 5 and Curtis at round 7. But I also wouldn't be shocked if on some weeks Curtis outplays Moore and outproduces Moore because they are both exceptionally talented. But if Curtis is running routes like I've been seeing him run routes, that's a whole different level of dangerous for Curtis Samuel. So I love him as a round 7 pick. I'm prioritizing him there mainly just to make sure that I have him on all my teams because I want him on all of my teams. Will Fuller, same kind of thing. He's valued, I think, at more of like a round 8 ADP in a lot of places. I've got him around 7 because, as a Texans fan, I've watched every game that Will Fuller's ever played, even going back to all of his games at Notre Dame because I studied him pretty extensively coming out when I was doing draft work. And when Will Fuller's on the field, he is an exceptional wide receiver. The only reason he's not rated much higher than round 7, just when you look at his pure efficiency and his pure point ceiling, is durability. When he's on the field, he is phenomenal. He just hasn't been on the field a whole lot in the last few years. So I'm comfortable with him in round 7 as an extreme boom or bust flex option throughout the whole season. And by boom, I just mean when he's healthy, he's going to boom. And when he's unhealthy, he's going to bust. Because when he's on the field, he's great. Will Fuller's the kind of guy that he and Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins, in terms of like DraftKings stacks, 1, 2, 3, like that's about as good of a stack as you're going to get. I don't care that DeAndre is going to get the large majority target share. I don't care that Kiki QT is going to take target share. I don't care that Jordan Thomas, up and coming tight end for them, is going to get target share. Will Fuller doesn't need a big target share. He needs 3 catches in a game and he'll get 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So if you can tell me that Will Fuller is going to be healthy for not even the whole year, just give me 13, 14 games. Healthy Will Fuller for 13, 14 games is a Pro Bowl receiver. I guarantee you that. He is that damn dangerous that in 13 or 14 games and in only 40, 50 catches, he can put up 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns. Like, that is how effective he is. He's crazy good. So I've got him as a round 7 talent, ahead of where most people have him because, again, now that he's healthy, I want him on my team. I'm willing to risk the injuries that always seem to plague him because when he's in my lineup, I'm winning. Like, just flat out, I'm winning. So that's worth a lot to me. And then Sterling Shepard kind of rounds out our round 7 guys. He is probably going to be the most heavily targeted receiver, wide receiver at least, in this Giants offense. It's conceivable that Saquon and Ingram approach his level of targets this year as well, or even eclipse his target level this year as well. But just in terms of pure Giants wide receivers, I expect Sterling Shepard to be their de facto number 1. I think he's also their best wide receiver. Great route runner, great hands, just ball tracking ability off the charts, tough over the middle, great yak threat. That's a very intriguing every week flex option. And keep in mind, that's his floor. Like, I think he could very easily eclipse that. But just in terms of pure floor, that's a pretty good flex option for me. So I'm 100% willing. If nobody else is there in round 7, I expect they will be. I expect Curtis Samuel will be, and I expect Will Fuller will be. But if nobody is there in round 7, Sterling Shepard as kind of my last resort panic button, I'm totally okay with that. Round 8 now, and here's where we're kind of getting into like high upside wide receiver 4 / quasi handcuff territory. Courtland Sutton, to me, he could probably finish as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 if everything breaks his way. At the very least, you'll be considering him as a flex option every single week. I'm assuming that he's going to be the X receiver on this team. I still am not entirely sure if it's going to be him or Emanuel Sanders, but at least in terms of physical profile, he fits the X spot in this offense, this kind of Shanahan-inspired West Coast offense. He fits the profile of an X a little bit better than Sanders, who fits more of the Z profile. And as I said before, the X in this style of offense is generally the main benefactor in the passing game because he's going to be the main target on all those bootlegs and the deep crosses and the go balls and the boot throwbacks and all that kind of stuff. So not to mention his size really does wonders for him in the red zone too, on like goal line fades and stuff. So, theoretically, he should have a pretty damn good season. And I do think that Joe Flacco fits this offense well. He had a career year in Baltimore when he was playing in almost the identical system to this one in Denver under Gary Kubiak. So, Flacco, he's performed well in this system. The offensive line should be much improved now that Mike Munchak is there. And Courtland Sutton, I think, it should be, theoretically, you can't see it, but I'm air quoting, should be the main benefactor of this offense as the X receiver. So I think you can take him as a very high upside wide receiver 4 / kind of every week flex option. If you took maybe a high upside flex option earlier, like let's say you took Chris Godwin or you took Will Fuller, you'd play no matter what. If you took Chris Godwin or you took like Mike Williams, and you want maybe something a little bit more stable, I think Courtland Sutton will be a little bit more stable from week to week, even if his ceiling maybe isn't as high. But I still really do like him as a pretty damn reliable wide receiver 4 and flex option. Right below him, I got Marques Valdes Scantling, who is in line to be the number 2 to Davante Adams. If something bad happens to Adams, he would then step right in and be the number 1 in this offense, because I think he's much better than Geronimo Allison. And, we've seen Davante get banged up a little bit here and there before. Specifically, he's had some problems with concussions. Not saying that I want him to get a concussion or that he will get a concussion, but it's something to take in mind that Valdes Scantling, with his physical profile and his developing chemistry with Rodgers, if something bad happened to Adams, Scantling would be easily an every week starter for me. Not to mention he's such a damn good athlete, and I think so explosive and so effective as a big body receiver that conceivably he could be kind of a sneaky flex play on some weeks if the matchup is right as well. So high upside wide receiver 4, potential flex play, potential handcuff to a bona fide wide receiver 1 if you went with Adams in the first round. Like, that's all of those things coming together, I think, make him a pretty attractive option in round 8. You'll be weighing him against a lot of tight ends and quarterbacks, so just kind of figure out how your team is coming together up to that point and figure out if you can afford to take that kind of receiver there. If not, there's a decent chance he'll be there in round 9 anyway, but still, the upside, I think, warrants a round 8 value. D.D. Westbrook should be the number 1 in Jacksonville, but I'm having a lot of problems trying to figure out this Jags offense. I'm still not 100% ready to trust Nick Foles. We know that John DeFilippo, who's the offensive coordinator in Jacksonville, is familiar with Foles. And I'm not saying that he's going to be the exact same system that he thrived in Philly, but part of the reason why he thrived in Philly is because Philly's offensive talent around Foles was spectacular. He had one of the best tight ends in the league, a very good X-receiver in Alshon Jeffrey when Alshon was healthy. Aguilar somehow came into his own in their Super Bowl year and became a capable slot receiver. There was a lot going right in Philly besides just Nick Foles having a good year. Like, the talent in Jacksonville is not the same as the talent in Philly. So I am intrigued to see if Foles still plays well. Not saying that he won't play well, but I'll tell you this, he's certainly not one of my top 15 quarterbacks. So I think that, I don't want to say limits Westbrook a little bit, but it does give reason to at least be a little bit cautious. I think if they want to have success in this team, they need to rely on their big, mauling offensive line and Leonard Fournette and let Foles do most of his work off of RPOs and play action. But like I just said last week when I broke down Kirk Cousins, John DeFilippo, for whatever reason, completely ignored the run game in Minnesota. So who knows if they're even going to commit to Fournette. So I don't know what to make of this Jags offense because I don't know if DeFilippo's learned from his lessons. I don't know if Nick Foles is going to be any good outside of Doug Peterson and all that talent surrounding him in Philly. I don't know if this is the year that Jacksonville can finally stay healthy on offense. It seems like they get banged up every single year. There's a lot of unknowns here. The only known is that Westbrook has had a great camp. He's extremely talented, and he should be, at least he should have a clear path to the number 1 job in Jacksonville. So target share should be there. It's just hard for me to kind of project the rest of the offense around him. So I think round 8 is fair, all things considered. Corey Davis, similar kind of thing. I don't really know how to project the offense around him. I don't know that they're going to finally commit to Derrick Henry and giving him the amount of carries that he needs to succeed, because clearly the Titans are a much better offense and a much better team when they commit to Henry, but I don't know if they've learned their lesson from last year. I don't know if Marcus Mariota can finally stay healthy. As of yet in his career, he has not been able to. I don't know exactly what flavor of West Coast system they're going to be running this year, if they're still going to kind of stick with the same general terminology and concepts that LaFleur ran last year. I'm assuming they will, but we don't know for sure. For all we know, they're going to prioritize more inside zone than outside zone, when I think they should be prioritizing outside zone. But that's questions that we're probably not going to be able to answer for a couple weeks until we get a few games into preseason. I can see in general what style of runs they're calling. So, there's a lot of questions about this Titans team. I have more questions about their offense than their defense. So it's hard for me to move Corey Davis higher than round 8 for now. Potentially this could change a lot over the next 3 weeks, but like if I was doing a draft today, I wouldn't take him higher than round 8. The potential is certainly much better because by all reports, he's having a pretty damn good camp. He's catching everything thrown his way. He's always been a great route runner, but he's healthy. He's catching everything. His rapport with Mariota is great. It's all kind of training camp fluff at the moment, but there's just a lot of questions that I have. So check back in 2 or 3 weeks. We'll see where he's at. But for now, I'm just kind of holding steady at round 8. I don't really feel comfortable with anything beyond that. And then Marvin Jones kind of rounds out my round 8 guys. He's the clear number 2 in Detroit to me, but more primarily a deep threat than Kenny Golladay, who I think is going to be more of Kenny can press deep a little bit, but I think Marvin's got a little bit better deep speed, whereas Golladay I think is a little bit better just kind of on like back shoulder balls and fades and working the middle, and obviously he's better in the red zone. So Marvin to me is like a true Z, where like you're hitting him mostly off play action on like deep posts and that kind of stuff. So I don't necessarily I don't expect him to have like high volume of targets, but I do expect him to be pretty efficient with those targets. So again, high upside wide receiver 4, a potential flex play depending on matchups. A touchdown threat every single week, 100-yard threat every single week. Even if he doesn't get huge volume, he's that kind of Z receiver. So, Golladay will be the more stable of the two. Jones, I think, has the potential to pop off over Golladay on any given week, depending on the matchup they play. So keep an eye out for him in round 8. He'll most likely leak into round 9, but for a wide receiver 4, you could do a hell of a lot worse than Marvin Jones. And then in round 9, we've got Keke Coutee, who, speaking as a Texans fan, I've watched a whole lot of Keke in training camp. I watched him a lot as a rookie, and I watched him at Texas Tech too. This is the slot receiver that Bill O'Brien has wanted since he came to Houston. The main problem has been that Keke hasn't been able to stay healthy in his 1 year in the league. He's healthy now, and he is ripping up training camp. I mean, he looks extremely quick, extremely explosive. Nobody's been able to cover him in the slot. If he stays healthy, and this is kind of a big if with all the Texans receivers, because none of them have really been able to stay healthy outside of Hopkins. If he stays healthy, we're talking about a potential 90-catch receiver here. With Hopkins also being a 90-catch receiver. Hopkins' average depth of target and overall yardage and touchdowns will be higher than QT, but on 3rd and 5, like that's going to be their guy. He's going to be their Cooper Kupp, where Fuller's going to be their deep threat and Hopkins is going to be their X. That's the kind of role that they envision for him, and he is very, very good and certainly capable of doing that. When he played last year, I think his first ever game, he caught like 11 balls. So that's the kind of upside we're looking at here, especially in a PPR, is just a volume monster here in Keke Coutee and a yak monster too. So again, it's a big question about health. We don't know if he's going to stay durable, but if he does stay on the field as a PPR monster, a wide receiver 4, and every week potential flex player, super high upside wide receiver 4. Now that I think about it, that's the kind of guy that can win you a league. That's the kind of depth that can pop off for you and win you a playoff game and win you a championship. So QT is definitely one of my main targets in round 9 and later. There's a decent chance that you can find him in round 10 or round 11, but round 9, for lack of a better option, if you don't like any of the running backs there, if you don't like any of the tight ends or quarterbacks or none of the other earlier receivers like Curtis Samuel or Sterling Shepard, if they are already off the board, I am totally fine with taking QT at the top of round 9. 100% totally fine with it. And I think in a few weeks when you guys see him in preseason, you're going to understand why, because this kid's for real. This is literally the slot receiver that Houston has been looking for as long as I can remember. Larry Fitzgerald comes after QT. He's pretty much the exact opposite, where he's been around forever. He's been a model of consistency. He's stayed on the field. He's been durable, and he catches everything thrown his way. I do think that this is the year that he kind of cedes the number 1 title officially to Cristian Kirk, but that doesn't mean that in an air raid offense it's going to throw the ball a shitload. He's not going to get a lot of targets. I think in PPR specifically, you can probably lock him in for at least 70 balls, which by Larry standards isn't super great, but by wide receiver 4 standards, that's perfectly acceptable. I think you can lock him in for 70. You can lock him in for probably about 6 or 7 touchdowns. He'll probably get a little bit more red zone work than even Cristian Kirk will. They got a rookie who's like 6'4", out of Iowa State. I'm totally blanking on his name. He'll probably be the main red zone threat. It's going to come to me later. I had like a first round grade on him, but anyway. But Larry's going to get some red zone work too. So 70 catches, 800-ish yards, a good amount of touchdowns. Like that's very, very solid wide receiver 4 and flex numbers. So I'm very comfortable taking him in round 9. Anthony Miller, I expect about the same for him. You could argue that he could have flirted with double-digit touchdowns as a rookie if Mitch Trubisky could actually hit him more often. Like he was overthrown on like 3 touchdowns last year that were just killers, and there was probably about 300 yards that were left off the table because of Mitch flat out missing Anthony Miller. He's already the second best receiver on the team behind a healthy Allen Robinson, because when Allen's healthy, he's the best to me. But Miller is a great number 2. You can put him in the slot. You can put him at Z. He's tough over the middle, great yards after catch weapon. They'll give him some carries on like sweeps and stuff like that. He might even get some punt return duty every now and then, because I think he can do that. Most likely it'll be Tariq Cohen doing most of it, but if they want to give him some punt return duty, he's got some special teams value for leagues that count punt return yardage. I wouldn't be shocked if he got some of that work. But overall, I really, really like him as a very solid number 2 for Chicago. And if Allen gets hurt again, he's the easy number 1 there and an easy start every single week. He'll get fed a lot of targets and he'll catch most of them because he's got great hands. So yeah, he's. I don't want to say he reminds me of Marques, Valdes, Scantling, because I don't want to consider him like a handcuff to Allen Robinson. But if Allen gets banged up again, like, this dude's going to be like 15 points every single week. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. He's a very, very good young receiver in a very, very good offense. So I love Anthony Miller in round 9. And Terry McLaurin, speaking of young receivers, he's the first rookie that I've got listed here. And a lot of people are going to say, what the hell are you doing? Like, what? Why is Terry McLaurin your highest rated rookie? Hear me out here. I loved Terry coming out of Ohio State. I love the value that the Redskins got taking him, and I think the 3rd round. He's probably going to be their number 1 wide receiver this year. I don't know who their quarterback's going to be. I don't know who their left tackle's going to be. I don't know who their running back's going to be. But I can reasonably say that Terry McLaurin is going to be the number 1 wide receiver in Washington. He is already, in my opinion, the best receiver on their team. Even over former first-round pick Josh Doxson. I think he is better than Doxson in every single way. Better route runner, better deep speed, great hands. I mean, truly, truly great hands. Not overly big, but just in terms of everything that makes a receiver great. Toughness, intelligence, route running, and athleticism. He has everything you want. I get a lot of almost like Victor Cruz vibes from him. He's a little bit bigger than Victor, I think, but just that super dependable wide receiver that kind of comes out of nowhere and then becomes a staple on your team for many, many years. Well, unfortunately, Victor's career was kind of ended early by that patellar tear, but you know what I mean. Like Victor was a really, really good receiver before those injuries kind of mounted or racked up. And I think Terry's going to be the same kind of guy. Just, a very dependable weapon on 3rd down, reliable in the red zone. You can throw deep balls to him. You can throw screens to him. Like, he does everything. And I mean everything. So I love him as their future number 1. I took him in my Dynasty League like way early this year because I think he's going to be the guy there for a long time. So I love Terry McLaurin. I think he's going to be the best and most productive rookie wide receiver in the NFL this year as the number 1 in Washington. And if Dwayne Haskins ends up starting, which I think he will eventually, who do you think Dwayne's going to go to? His college teammate, Terry McLaurin. So there's potential here for a rookie wide receiver to carry a lot of fantasy teams late in the season when Dwayne Haskins is inevitably going to end up as the starter, and he's going to be feeding Terry the ball as much as humanly possible. So please, I beg of you, keep an eye out for Terry McLaurin. He's going to be available after round 9, but I put him as a 9th round value so that as you're going through the 10th round and the 11th round and the 12th round, you keep him in mind and you have him on the board and you be ready to pull that trigger, because either you do it or somebody else will. And this dude, he could be a league winner for you. I truly, truly believe that. He could be a league winner for you. Round 10, Geronimo Allison, he's the next Packers receiver. He's going to be probably their primary slot receiver. So I think, if MVS goes down or Adams goes down, you can move him outside, but majority, if everybody stays healthy, he'll likely be in the slot. So I think he'll get a decent target share. I think he's really more of like a wide receiver 5 handcuff type. I don't expect him to be like in consideration for a flex play every week, but if they're going up and you expect like a shootout, and you expect them to be throwing 40 plus times in a game and you think Rodgers is going to go off, yeah, you can throw him in there as a flex, but really he's more of a wide receiver 5, break glass in case of emergency kind of guy, a handcuff kind of guy, but still a decently high upside handcuff at that. Sammy Watkins, I have him as a 10th round value, but I'm probably not going to take him in the 10th round anyway. I kind of just don't want any part of Sammy at this point. I know the talent's there. I know he's in a phenomenal offense, but I'm so over having him on my team. Like I kind of have to put him there because like I get the upside, but I almost don't care about the upside at this point. Like I would probably skip over him in favor of like 10 other guys. So maybe I'll end up moving him down just because I've so gotten sick of dealing with Sammy Watkins burning me and then going off and then burning me again. But I don't know. I'm over Sammy. I'm not even going to bother talking about him. I think everybody's over Sammy at this point. Emanuel Sanders, again, I think he's going to end up as the Z in Denver. But, you look at videos of him in practicing, you could never tell that he tore his Achilles last season, like late last season. I think he tore it like 7 or 8 months ago. And you literally can't tell. I mean, he worked so damn hard to get back. He looks great. Even at his age, he looks phenomenal. And even if Courtland is the X and gets a larger target share, I still think Sanders is going to get a pretty fair amount of targets himself. I think he'll probably end up somewhere between 60 and 70 catches. I could see 700-800 yards. I could see 5 or 6 touchdowns, which for a number 2 receiver in that offense, which they expect to be run heavy and focusing most of their passing targets on Sutton, for a number 2 receiver, that's not bad numbers at all. And again, a matchup dependent flex option if you expect them to be really in shootout mode. Let's say they're playing against KC or the Chargers, who both have explosive offenses. If they really got a pass to get back into a game, I think Sanders is going to be the guy that gets a shitload of targets in those scenarios as a primary chain mover for them. So again, kind of a situational flex play. DK Metcalf, again, situational flex play, potential high upside wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 for now, but potential high upside wide receiver 4. He gets a lot of flack, and I did a whole episode on him before the draft. He gets a lot of unnecessary flack. He's a much better receiver, like technical receiver, than people think he is. He's not just a big dude that runs fast. He is a big dude that runs fast, but he's not just a big dude that runs fast. And I think in Seattle's style of offense, where it's run, take deep shot, like he is perfectly built for that. So I actually like DK a lot. Again, he's another guy besides Maclaurin that I took in my fantasy league, in my dynasty league. Actually, I took a lot of receivers in my dynasty league. But I think DK is going to be a really good one for Seattle. Maybe not super high volume, but in terms of efficiency per volume, he's going to be right up there because he's so damn explosive. So I love him there as a 10th round flyer pick. John Brown, there's a decent chance that he becomes kind of the de facto number 1 in Buffalo. Certainly their primary deep threat. They don't really have anyone else that I think can threaten him for that. Robert Foster, maybe, but I think John Brown is just a better receiver than Robert Foster. Health permitting, I think he's going to be at minimum their primary deep threat, but potentially kind of their de facto number 1. Supposedly he's had a very, very good camp. So if you care about investing in the Bills offense at all, with like a wide receiver 4 or 5, John Brown's probably the one that I would take even over Robert Foster. And then Paris Campbell, another rookie that I took in Dynasty, who has been lighting up training camp. I don't know what his target share is going to be as a rookie, but if T.Y. gets hurt again, if Marlon Mack gets hurt again, and they're trying to just generate offense, Paris Campbell is kind of a do-it-all slot receiver. Even they put him a little bit outside, but Frank Reich has raved about him. And so if they start sustaining injuries like they did last year, and they just need to find a way to generate offense, I think Paris Campbell is going to be the main beneficiary of that. There's a decent chance he'll end up as their starting slot receiver, but for now, I'm really just kind of drafting him as essentially a handcuff in case T.Y. goes down again. But if he ends up as the starting slot receiver, he'll get work because Frank Reich loves this kid, loves him, and he's really, really improved as a route runner. Brian Hartline was his receiver coach at Ohio State, and he did really good work with all these Ohio State kids that came out, Maclaurin, Campbell, like all of them. So Campbell's a much better route runner than I think people expected when he was coming out of college. I think he's a natural fit in the slot for them. He's got like legitimate deep speed. He can take some handoffs as a hybrid running back. He can do work for you on special teams. Like they're going to get him the ball. I don't know how much yet, but they're going to make an effort to get him the ball. And if they start sustaining injuries in the receiving core above him on the depth chart, whether it's Hilton or Funchess or even Deion Kane, who actually he might even be above Deion Kane on the depth chart now that I think about it now. But if they start sustaining injuries above him, like I think he's developed enough that he can actually make an immediate impact, not just on the actual field, but for your fantasy team too. So again, another high upside flyer handcuffy type pick here in round 10. And then Golden Tate, who maybe not, he's not the Golden Tate of old, but he's still, I think, one of the premier yards after catch threats in the league. And I think they are also going to make an effort to get him the ball alongside Sterling Shepard. It's kind of interesting that they've got like 3 slot receivers, or I guess 4 slot receivers on that team, because Shepard's better in the slot, Tate's better in the slot. Saquon, when you put him in the slot, is pretty damn good. And Evan Ingram is basically a big slot. So they've got like an all slot receiver offense in New York. But, Tate, I think, is a pretty reliable wide receiver 5 with wide receiver 4 flex upside. You could do a lot worse than him in this draft range, really. And that moves us into round 11 plus, which, like I said, with the running backs is really, it's a lot of, I don't want to say handcuffs, but it's guys that would be really only relevant in case of injury, as well as some like late round flyers, some rookie flyers, some potential guys that you put in as an emergency flex type stuff. The thing you want to pay attention to the most is the battle between N'Keal Harry and Jacoby Myers. Myers, like I know Harry's been banged up a little bit, but Myers has gotten a lot of snaps ahead of Harry on the depth chart, even as an undrafted free agent, ahead of a first-round pick, and that's something to pay attention to because Bill Belichick is the kind of coach where he doesn't really care where you're drafted. He doesn't care what they're paying you. Like, if you're not as good as the guy who's cheaper or less heralded, you're not going to play. And, supposedly Jacoby Myers has learned the offense extremely quickly. He's been very good at getting in the right place at the right time, which we know matters more than any other quality in this offense. They don't care how fast you are, how big you are. They just want you to be in the right place at the right time, and Myers has been very good at that. So he's a name to watch, and I think, in like your last round of the draft, if you've already got a defense and a kicker and you want to take a flyer on a receiver that could make an impact as a rookie, Jacoby Myers is your guy. There's a non-zero chance that he outsnaps N'Keal Harry, who right now has a 9th round ADP, by the way. Like, N'Keal Harry's being taken in the 9th round, and at least so far in training camp, he's being outshined by an undrafted rookie. So that is something to pay attention to. As we get deeper into preseason, it's certainly something that I'm going to be paying attention to, and it could affect both Harry and Myers' ADPs very, very significantly. So I implore you to watch that. And then, everybody else in this draft range, it's a lot of guys that are going to end up on waivers that you're going to be picking up, after people start getting injured and all that kind of stuff. So these rankings are really just with waiver wires and waiver orders in mind. There's 74 names here. Most leagues, you're not going to have 74 receivers drafted, but they are all still worth paying attention to. And by probably October, they're all going to end up on rosters in one form or another. So here's my rankings for all of those kind of borderline late round pick waiver kind of guys. And yeah, that'll do it. That'll wrap it up for day 2 of my 2019 fantasy position rankings. My voice is getting a little bit hoarse. I've been talking for so long. You might be able to hear that, but hopefully watching all this was worth it for you, gave some more insight on my thoughts on these receivers, my thoughts on general draft strategy, my thoughts on how to construct a team to make your game day start and sit decisions a little bit easier and less stressful. Hopefully this will help you guys out, not just in August, but in September and October, November, and December as well. So, but as of now, I'll be back tomorrow with more rankings for quarterbacks, and then tight ends are the day after. If you want any continuous updates on these rankings every single week until week 1, feel free to go subscribe to my Patreon page. Any donation, even as low as $1 a month, will get you access to the PPR position rankings, the standard format rankings when those are released next week, the combined position rankings when those are done later this week, all updates to those, as well as monthly patron-only Q&A sessions, weekly game picks during the season and the playoffs as well, and a whole lot more that's going to be coming up in the future. So again, for $1 a month, that's a lot of extra stuff that you get in addition to all the content that I'm putting out weekly on this channel. So hopefully that sounds worth it to you guys. Again, like I said, I'll be back tomorrow with quarterback rankings and then tight end the next day. And I'm going to go rest my vocal cords because we got a lot of recording to do again tomorrow. So yeah, until then, later.